Welcome to Coach's Corner of Michigan, Special Edition. I'm your host, Andy Weidenbach. We'll be talking to coaches, players, and other key figures in the hockey world. This podcast is brought to you by Stream Cortex for all your hockey needs. Our guest today is Mark Craig, Director of Pro Scouting for the Carolina Hurricanes. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Andy. Real pleased to be here. Thank you.
So, Mark, I was looking at your bio. I know we've known each other for quite a while, but after your playing days, you got into coaching at a pretty early age. Can you tell us how that all occurred?
Yeah, I came home. I had played at Bowling Green, and I came home and really didn't know what I wanted to do. And within a few weeks of coming home that summer, that next fall, my dad called me and said, "Hey, I need a favor." He said, "A friend of mine has a Pee Wee team in Warren, and he needs a coach. Would you do that for me?" And I don't know about you, Andy, but telling my dad I wouldn't do him a favor wasn't going to work. So I went and coached a Pee Wee team in Warren, and it was, I think, a double-A team. And I tell you, 3-4 weeks into it, I realized how much I enjoyed it and never looked back after that. Went on to coach a Bantam team the following year with some of the same kids. And then I think the next year coached a midget team and stayed in midget hockey for quite a while until I joined CompuWare. So,
and you coached for quite a while. I mean, you coached CompuWare, you coached the Spitfires. You were an amateur scout for the Flyers. You were GM for the Whalers in the OHL. Pro scout for the Hurricanes. Now you're the director of pro scouting. How did you get into scouting? What made that change?
Well, I think they found out I couldn't coach.
Yeah,
I think what happened is after I had left Windsor, after I'd gotten fired in Windsor, which I think every coach does, at some point in your career, if you don't get fired, you probably didn't coach at a level that had that happen. So though I stayed good friends with Jim Rutherford, as you know, and stayed good friends with Pete, when they let me go in Windsor, I had one son at the time and one on the way. And at that point in my life, the options of coaching weren't going to be able to allow me to sustain a family. At least I didn't think they were. I had an option to go out in the Western League and coach Lethbridge, and a wife who needed to be shown on the map where Lethbridge was. And then I had an opportunity to also coach Cranbrook, your old school, and it was really just to help out. They were in between coaches. Ted had left, and they were looking for somebody to just help because they thought they had made a bad hire. And in doing that, Bobby Goodenow called me, local guy who was NHL president, PA president at the time, and he said, "Hey, Flyers are looking for a amateur scout in this area. Would you be interested?" So it was a great opportunity for me to jump in and get some scouting background in. I helped at Cranbrook that year, had both jobs going, and at the same time started a business, which was going to allow me to kind of raise a family and do some of the things I wanted to. So I think I was with the Flyers for 4 seasons. I would scout by night and started a business by day. So that's how it started for me.
Yeah, that's a lot of balls in the air with a young family, and it certainly keeps you on your toes. Who were some of your earliest influences in hockey?
Well, for me, one of the guys that really made an impact hockey-wise for me was a guy by the name of Bob Nelson. And I don't know how well Bob was known in those days, but Bob was an assistant coach, coaching in the Detroit area, was a real defensive specialist, like really understood the game. And for me, he came on board as an assistant coach when I was coaching the Grosse Pointe Bruins, which was a AAA midget team. And he really had a big impact. I think I learned more from Bob, and I think a lot of us do. If you listen to your assistant coaches, especially if they have that experience that he had, I learned more from him in one season. And then he stayed with me right through the rest of my career with CompuWare and then with the Spitfires. He was my assistant coach with the Spits as well. Really good on the ice coach, good teacher, but where he was really dynamic was up in the stands. He had that great ability to watch a period and then come down between periods and hand me a note card that had what the other team was doing to shut us down. So he was probably, from a hockey standpoint, one of my biggest influences. From a mentor standpoint and from a people standpoint, I think Pete Karmanos was probably the one who really changed my life. He was a life changer for so many people, but he also, what I learned from him, and Andy, I mean, my first day with him, he asked me if I knew what CEO meant. And I said, yeah, Chief Executive Officer. And he said, no, Mark, it stands for community, employees, and owners. And that was my first taste of a very successful person who put community first. And I think that really impacts you. So Pete impacted me greatly. And I think those would be the two for me.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Pete had a very, very positive influence in the hockey community, not only in the Detroit area, but, all over the country. I mean, he has ownership with the Hurricanes and down in Florida with the Everblades, and he's touched a lot of people's lives in hockey, and I couldn't agree more with that, with what you said there. So you were also an amateur scout for the NHL and a pro scout. What's the difference between the two?
Well, for me, I think the amateur scouting is the toughest job in the business. Anybody that can go watch 16 through 18-year-olds and determine what they're going to be and have a good track record of that, for me, is pretty special. So on the amateur side, though I enjoyed it, and it was kind of a segue for me to get into a business, as I said, to sustain a family. What I learned there is what a tough job it was. And you're in cold rinks and you're in junior rinks and you're watching junior players. And for me, it's the toughest job going. The pro side, what we do is we're looking for at every other team, we're trying to assess what that player's upside is. Is he undervalued? That's the big thing in the business today, I think, is he a player that the team he's on right now doesn't value what he can bring? And do we think more of him than they do? And so from a trade standpoint, and I don't think you ever want to make a trade where you're trading a top player for a top player. You want to be trying to trade for somebody that you think has more value if they come to your team and they fit your system.
Yeah, it's a lot. There's a lot to it. I think a lot of people that aren't involved in pro hockey don't realize how much work goes into it and how much of a science it really is to, manage all of the cap space and all the hurdles and things that you guys have to encounter in a day's work. I know you're the director of pro scouting now. Can you tell us a little bit about? I know you're managing a group of people or several people. What are some of your duties as a director of pro scouting?
Well, we have 5 pro scouts, and each of them have 6 teams. One of them has 7, but each of them have 6 organizations that they have to follow. My job is to try to make sure that they're getting the coverage they need, that they have all the tools they need. I spend a lot of time working with my boss, who's Eric Tulsky, our assistant GM, and trying to make sure that our scouts, number one, have the tools that they need to be successful, and then to make sure that we're getting the coverage of each team. So I try to follow that, and then when it comes down to it, I have to be in a position to probably know almost every player in every organization if we're going to make a trade or go after them as UFAs. So leading up to the trade deadline, I spend most of my time trying to look at trade acquisitions that we're thinking about. What are our needs? So I have to know our team. And then getting input from those 5 scouts so that I can see the right players and make sure that we're going to make the best trade possible at the trade deadline. And then the second half of the season, I probably spend most of my time looking at UFAs that we're going to go after for the next season.
Do you guys use video to evaluate as well?
We use a lot of video. We are probably of all the teams, I would think we use the most video. We're very video oriented. We try to, from my personal standpoint, I try to see as many live games as I can. But what video really allows me to do is confirm what I saw live. So we have 3 different sets of video we can use. We have Sport Logic, we use Instat, but then we also have on our information system, we've pulled video that we can look at. So we're very video conscious. Our scouts probably are 60-40 video versus live, which cuts our budget and allows us to see more games, we believe. It's a fast game today. And if somebody doesn't have the feet to play the game, they better have the hockey sense to be in the right spot. So we really are keying in on speed and hockey sense in our scouting.
Yeah, for sure the game has changed. You would know that with your experience as both a coach and a scout. That brings me to my next question. So, you're watching video, you look at some players, you like what you see. What are some of the intangibles that you guys are looking for in a player?
Well, as I said, I think for us, one of the key things we look at is hockey sense. We really want to see is this player, and the hard part is a lot of time hockey sense, we have a tendency to establish their hockey sense based on the outcome. You touched on something else. You talk about coaching background and scouting background. The toughest thing, I think, for me going from coaching to scouting was the intangibles as a coach that I love that made me love a player, which a lot of the nights was his compete or those little things, those little intangibles he brought to the game. You've got to be careful that they don't cloud your judgment because it's a different coach than you're trying to find players for. And it's a different organization than you're trying to find players for. And how much of that can be improved. And as a coach, you're looking at what he did today. What's he doing for me today? And my job is to try to figure out where does he fit in our organization? How will he fit with our coaching staff and how we play? And will he make us a better team? And that's not always the same thing when you're coaching day to day.
So what are some of the differences and some of the similarities that you see in North American hockey players versus players from other countries?
I think for me, the hardest part that I have found is that our idea of compete in North America is different than the idea of a players compete in Europe. I don't believe that it's the same level of compete. Now, that being said, we have Sebastian Aho is probably one of the most competitive players in the league. Smaller forward who wins puck battles day after day, game after game, night after night. So I'm not saying that Europeans don't compete, but what you've got to be careful of is the leagues there don't seem to be as physical as the leagues that we watch here in North America. So trying to look at a player in the KHL who's playing more of a passing game and questioning whether he compete in the NHL is very difficult. Trying to transfer a player's compete into the NHL from a European game is different. Where in North America, you're seeing what you see, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I know the game is much different in different areas of the country, even in Canada compared to the U.S. back in the day. I mean, when we would go up and play in Canada when you were coaching and I was coaching, I mean, the game was always a little bit more physical up there. And, now, like you said before, the game is more skill. And, of course, you want players with a high hockey IQ, players that can think the game. I know when I was with the Wings, I was talking to some of the coaches there, and they said they like players who have the ability to read the blitz during the game. I mean, it's forever changing. It's read and react. And I think, that makes perfect sense. The game is going so fast, as you stated before. So you have some players in your system. You guys have your rookie camp. You got a bunch of young kids come in, 18, 19 years old. They're drafted. What advice do you give those guys, or what are you talking to those guys about so that you can get them into your system?
We're fortunate. We probably have one of the best development guys in the league, if you ask me, and it's Sergei Samsonov, who played for the Vipers. For old Detroiters that remember the Vipers, he played for the Vipers and went on to have a pretty storied career in 5 or 6 different teams. But Sergei does a great job for us, and because he came over here as a 17-year-old kid from Russia, he has a great ability to understand what they're going through, as so many of them have left home as juniors to play hockey or leaving home to play in the AHL. I think the one thing that I would stress to a kid is to have some patience and to understand that I guess what I'm trying to say is the area that I think we do probably the worst job, and I hate to say that, and I don't mean that in our case because I think Sergei does a great job, but we have this tendency to not look after their emotional and mental well-being. we grade them as players, we grade how they play the game, but we don't understand what they're going through and trying to make it. And so many young players come into this league thinking that the AHL is just an average league, and it's not. It's a phenomenal league. And the biggest step they're going to make isn't from junior to pros. It's from junior to the AHL. So many players are not capable of getting right to the NHL, so they've got to spend time in the AHL, and they become discouraged there if they're there too long. So I think the real key is trying to convince kids that to never give up. And the other thing I would want to tell a player is whether if you're in an organization that you don't feel you're getting traction in and you're not getting noticed, realize that there's probably on every single night you play, either in junior or in the AHL, there's 12 to 15 scouts from other teams watching you. And if you're not getting traction on your team, understand that you have a chance to get traction in another organization by showing them what you can do every night.
Have you seen much burnout in players where they've been playing since they've been 3, 4, 5 years old? They get up to the pro level and then they just lose the desire to play. Have you seen that happen much at your level?
Yeah, and I think you do, Andy, and I think that's part of what I'm talking about. I think it's really hard for them. I think it's harder for them emotionally and mentally to get through the AHL program than it is physically at times. I think they face hurdles there of they have these high expectations that they're going to spend a year in the AHL or 2 years in the AHL. They have these expectations that they're going to – I think the other thing, they have these expectations that they're going to be what they were in junior, that if they scored 25 to 50 goals in junior, they're going to do it in the NHL. The guys who make it are the ones who realize who they are and adjust to become what they need to be to make it to the NHL. For me, the biggest surprise when I went from watching junior hockey with the Whalers and being the GM that year to being a pro scout was realizing how many of these fourth line centers in the National Hockey League were 50 goal scorers in junior hockey. And the ones who make it are the ones who realize they're not going to score 50 in the NHL. So I'm going to change my game. I'm going to be a good defensive center. I'm going to be responsible. I'm going to do my job. I'm going to make it that way. And I think a lot of players don't make it because they don't get that. And then from the burnout side, I really think that's where so much pressure gets put on these kids that they feel this pressure to make it and don't understand that it's really about continuing every day to get better. Just every day, try to get better. And I think you have a chance to play.
Yeah, following the process, some intestinal fortitude. I mean, those are some of the intangibles that, some guys just have that burning desire. They just never quit. And an example of that would be when I was with the Wings, Luke Glendening was that guy. He never got a scholarship in college. He ended up being the captain at Michigan. Yeah. He signed as a free agent in Grand Rapids. He became a great defensive center. And, he's had a great career in the NHL. And I'm sure that you've seen this many times, which brings me to my next question. So you've been out on the road scouting, and everybody kind of knows who the good players are. And so you go there to watch somebody that, is on your list, and maybe you discover somebody else. So is there a guy that you discovered that, you found maybe as a free agent or a late round pick that ended up hitting the home run ball and it really ended up being a great NHL player?
Well, Andy, I don't have one of those for you. What I can tell you is a couple stories for me that, first of all, you're 100% right. There's numerous times I've gone to a building to look at 3 or 4 players on a team and walked away going, wow, I missed this guy. This was the guy that was the best player on the ice, and I wasn't looking at him that night. And he got my attention, and then we continued to follow him. But the story I'm going to tell you is there's as a coach, there were so many times that players got cut from the team I was coaching, and how they reacted to it, how they handled that. And so many kids, because they got cut, think they're not good enough. And I'll give you an example. Sean Chambers got cut from my team as a midget player with CompuWare. And Sean went on to play, I think, another 8 or 9 years in the NHL before his career was up. And I think he made close to $10 million in that career. And here was a kid who, after he got cut by me, shook my hand and said, "Coach, I think the world of you, and I wish I had made your team, but I'm going to show you made a mistake." And that for me was an eye-opener, because this kid, and he wasn't real skilled, he wasn't real talented, but he was committed. And so that would be one of my stories. My other story is I cut a young goaltender. I had an older team. I had a group of 16-year-olds on a midget team, and I was worried that this 15-year-old who was very immature, though he was the best goaltender at camp, wasn't going to be able to sustain the locker room, that he would be picked on mercifully in that regard. And so I didn't take him. I took another goaltender who did well. And that kid, unfortunately, spent the next 7 or 8 years convinced that he had gotten screwed in the process, that I was wrong, but he did nothing to change that. So I guess the story I want to leave is don't get caught up in, as a player, as a kid, don't get caught up in getting cut from a team. It's not always because you're not the best player. It's not always because you weren't good enough. Maybe the coach made a mistake, and look at that. So that would be my story of watching kids get cut or not get everything they wanted, but then proving at a later date that they deserved it.
Yeah, I remember a story back in the day where Mike Madonna got cut from one of his AAA teams and ended up playing for a competitor and ended up being not only the best player in the league, he went to the World Juniors, played in the NHL, was a first pick in the NHL. I mean, who would cut Mike Madonna, right? But it happens. I mean, yeah. It just happens. So, yeah, mental toughness is all part of it. Being able to, get through those tough spots and overcome some really maybe what you feel is some injustices. But yeah, the tougher you are, the better it's going to be, because hockey's a tough business, like a lot of businesses. And, it's really the strong survive, I guess. Well, Mark,
I think parent support also, Andy. I think so many parents get caught up in those same things. My son got cut from a team, and instead of supporting their player and supporting their kid, they take almost the same approach the kid did. And so I think I tell the parents the same thing. Hey, support your kid. Show him that he can be better than what that coach thought.
Yeah, I agree totally on that. Well, Mark, thanks for sharing your story and providing some insight on the NHL and how the system works. It's really been a very enlightening experience to hear your story. And I know you're a busy guy. You're up in Traverse City getting ready to do some scouting. So thank you for your time and good luck this season.
Andy, thanks. Appreciate it. Really enjoyed it. Good getting caught up with you as well.
Yeah, it was great to see you. Thanks again, Mark.
Thanks.